Well, amid some renewed labor uncertainty at Canada Post, there's an interesting and timely new report out from the Montreal Economic Institute looking at what options Canada has, the federal government has, for actually reforming or maybe even fully privatizing Canada Post. You can read more at iedm.org. Joining us to talk more about it is one of the authors of this report, Vincent Geloso, senior economist with the Montreal Economic Institute, assistant professor of economics as well at George Mason University. Vincent, great to have you with us here.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Rob, for I think the 10th time together that we're talking Canada Post. So it
It's
seems like
perhaps
you and I are dancing on
yes, on
this.
and on this issue goes. But it does feel like it's coming to a head in one way or another. I mean, once we had the big labor dispute late last year, that was followed up by what was, I guess, called the Industrial Inquiry Commission to really take a deeper look at some of the problems Canada Post faces. And I think it's relevant to where we're at today because it's a pretty bleak picture of Canada Post, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think I went back to try and find my notes for what we were discussing the first time and what was the point we were when we were talking. I think it was close to a decade ago. Can't remember the exact date, but found my earlier notes, and it's a really good way of thinking about what's happening at Canada Post because the problems were on the horizon way back when. And when I looked at the data from way back when, it was clear there were inefficiencies at Canada Post, cost control issues that they were having. Labor disputes were already there, and there was the overarching problem of the part of the market on which Canada Post has a monopoly, which is letter mail. Canada Post has been having difficulties generating the same revenues it used to because people are moving to different ways of communicating, of sending mails through mostly email, but also messenger packages that are far more effective than Canada Post and Purelator, which is owned by Canada Post to a high degree. So the core story you end up with is Canada Post was in the long, like this is a problem that was long in the horizon. There's no sign that this is going to resolve itself within the current framework.
And it's a weird situation it leaves us in because, like you say, I mean, letter volumes have declined precipitously. Canada Post is a lot less relevant to many or even most Canadians. Yet when it does go on strike, it causes such a huge disruption, especially for small business.
Yes, but I would point out that these disruptions are much smaller now, cost wise, for firms than they were before. So, for example, one of the things I did way back when was from all the strikes we could find from the 1970s onwards. Each time there was one, we tried to find estimates that people made in the public of what were the costs of the strike to businesses, and it went from substantial daily costs relative to GDP. But today they're like a third of what they used to be in the 70s. So that means that even this ability of disrupting markets to get what the labor union wants or what management wants is no longer an option. So even there, it's telling you about the irrelevance of Canada Post. The new thing, however, in the portrait that I did not expect happening was while Canada Post has received a lot of indirect financial aid from the federal government, and they say we don't receive subsidies, but they do get special treatment. But now they actually get outright government monies, like straight
Right.
up taxpayers injection, and that's new in the portrait. They got close to a bit more than a billion few years ago now. And the last time they got that before then was in the 1980s when it was converted from a government department to a crown corporation. So what it looks like now is Canada Post is going to keep doing the same thing it was doing. Is its inefficiencies will be shouldered either by consumers by making them pay more, but now since consumers were like, no, we don't want to deal with you if you're that bad in terms of the service. Oh, now we're going to go see the government and get taxpayer funds out of this, which is different different way of getting screwed.
And it's funny because there are those who want to preserve Canada Post in its current form, and one of the ideas is, well, let's expand into other businesses that can somehow supplement the postal business, like the idea of Canada Post being in banking. Like no one would propose the idea of a crown corporation in banking, but the idea that Canada Post should also do that and it can offset these losses. What do you make of that?
So I don't think it's a bad idea to diversify in other things because if you look at DHL, and you're going to see that there's a link for why I'm using Deutsche Post.
Yeah.
Deutsche Post went from a postal company to now a company that does logistical services, that does market studies for firm. They do multiple types of business related services. So they don't just do mail. And But you know what's different about DHL relative to Canada Post is they're a private firm and they have to make a profit. So they have to figure out what works. Inside the incentives right now at Canada Post, as long as you have the availability of the taxpayer purse at your disposal, you have no incentive to control costs. You have no incentive to innovate. You have no incentive to try things out and abandon them if they don't work, or pick the one that actually works best. So it's not that they're wrong when they're saying maybe Canada Post would be good in banking, maybe it would be good in logistical services. I don't know, but you know who would figure it out best? Consumers and businesses interacting together with the profit motive in mind. And that means that the way to discover whether or not that works is to privatize Canada Post and open up the market to competition. That's it. That's the only way we'll figure out if these claims are correct. It's not by saying, oh, Canada Post should do more things that government don't usually do.
So the report focuses on Germany, lessons from Germany and what Germany went through, as you alluded to, with its postal office. So, do you see it as an apples to apples comparison? How similar are we to where Germany was at when they made these decisions?
I actually think people. So the usual reply we get is that Canada is not Germany. Germany is a really small country with lots of people. But if you think about it, Canada is actually a small country with lots of people. It's just that there's a lot of territory where no one lives.
Right.
Canadians are clustered around the border, and actually, the way we're clustered along the border, the effective area in which Canadians live is quite much smaller than people think. That means the markets that actually need to be connected are not that far apart. There's also an upside. There are downside to density. So in Germany, one of the big costs for DHL is that they often are stuck in traffic. So the trucks have slower speeds, slower deliveries. So you don't do as much output per hour. You don't deliver as many letters, whereas Canadian cities are far more fluid than German cities. So in actual many ways, this cost structure in Canada should be in favor of Canada Post. So there's actually like a setting where we should actually be doing better than we are right now. So the German case, the reason why it's cool is in the 1980s, they started opening up the competition. So there was no longer like a segmented part of the market that was the exclusive domain of the Crown Corporation. And at the same time, and a bit actually a few years later, they started to privatize it. And the result was this cumulative reform is you see that the prices started falling. So letter prices today actually in Germany are 10% what they were, 10% below what they were in adjusted for inflation, what they were in 1989. Whereas in Canada, the adjusted for inflation, the price of TAM is 50% above what it used to be in 1989. So Germans, despite privatization, high cost of operation, the trend has been in their favor. So the prices have fallen and they've stabilized at a much lower level, whereas Canada Post just keeps increasing the prices. And now it's not just the prices that's increased, it's kind of the shadow price that we have to pay through higher taxes because now Canada Post goes and asks the government for taxpayer monies. So the German example tells us, no, actually, we could do much better if we privatize and introduce competition.
Well, and much of industrial policy in this country is not geared toward consumers. Unfortunately, it's often about propping up industries or certain jobs. And I think the concern is that, and we see it with the latest rejection at Canada Post, is trying to protect what was once there, or what these jobs look like, what these jobs pay. Is it realistic to maintain that, or how different would the private side look?
So this is something that I don't like. That it's not that I don't think the question is good. It's a question that has a premise inside that says, government and politicians. And if I was a politician or a technocrat, I would know. I don't know. And you know what? Politicians in Ottawa also don't know. Markets are about figuring out true coordination through the price system. It's people try things out. If it makes money, you keep doing it. If it doesn't, you stop doing it. It's that system is a system of trial and errors. And no politician can figure that out very very easily, and it doesn't. That means we also don't know what the proper practices are. So that's why when we are proposing the at the MEI, when we're proposing our privatization approach, we're saying the best way to make sure that the privatization succeeds is to actually give shares to the employees.
Yeah.
So straight up, set up a block of shares, give them, not like sell them at a lower price, just give them to the employees, and that has two very large benefits. The first one is the employees now actually get a reward from controlling costs. So if they do things that are cheaper, they get a reward out of it because higher profits.
Right.
And they also get incentives to innovate, and that means increasing productivity. So both ways it works, and that's what you would actually want to do. So as a way of making privatization succeed, and also like getting on board the staff at Canada Post, so it doesn't generate like in the transition a conflict of labor again, so it becomes like a disruptive privatization. We're saying buy in the members of Canada Post by giving them shares. Yes, yes, it means that the government will generate fewer revenues from the privatization, but it increases the odd of a successful privatization and a successful, like an environment in which people try things out and will figure out what works best without having to have a one size fits all solution that comes with the pretense of knowledge that is so common to politicians.
Is there any role still for government to play in ensuring, like what we have now, where the cost of sending a letter anywhere in the country is the same, or guarantees about a certain level of service? Does that still fit in a privatized model?
I think it can. The reason why is people tend to think that we need to make sure, like people in say Lac La Biche, Alberta, that they need to have a crown corporation to get mail. Uh, that's not true. We can actually have a crown court, like a private open market that's competitive, and people in very remote areas, we can have a specific policy that helps them, so that the
Mhm.
vast majority of Canadians gain, but the few people who live in remote areas actually are compensated for that. And you know what? Actually, we already do that in Canada. It's called the Northern Residence Tax Deduction. So for
That's right.
people in certain remote areas, you're getting $5.50 per day of residence to $11 a day of residence in a remote area. Just either increase some areas that will define so that very remote people can still get compensation for this, and or bonify the amount to increase it to say rather than 550 to 11, do it 650 to 11 per day, or to 12 per day, something like this. Doesn't have to be the high cost policy of a crown corporation with a monopoly and all the bad incentives that come with this, the taxpayer liabilities, the higher prices for the vast majority of consumers. Just target those that we actually want to help. That is far better a policy than the one size fits all we're stuck now. So I'm not saying like throw away people from Lac La Biche. That's not the case. What we're
Mhm.
saying is do targeted policies. They're far more efficient, far more cost effective, and the vast majority of Canadians in that case will get lower prices.
Yeah, I often, think of, because this comes up a lot, but you think of people in these communities and what else they need. Well, they need groceries, or they need gasoline, they need these other essentials that we don't leave to government, we don't leave to crown corporations. And when there are those unique circumstances, like for example, people living in the remote north, there are ways of addressing some of those pressures. But does or can that apply in a similar way here, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's my point. I think we can't underestimate the ability of markets to find solutions because customers in Lac La Biche are still customers. So if you let corporations charge prices, they might be able to try say, well, we still have clients over there. What if we try to have this? What if we try and mix different services so that the post office doesn't do just post office post doesn't just do postages, it does say groceries as well. So it tries to piggyback multiple operations in that particular area, and it works better. And you know who does that? Amazon. Amazon has been the most efficient connector of people in remote regions across the world. Same thing with now a linkage with telecoms. Starlink does something highly similar in terms of the ability to reach customers in remote areas. We can't underestimate the power of market forces. So let's give as much room for market forces to work. And then, and that's probably the best economic approach, is if you want to help certain people, then target, let the market work. And only after the market has worked, tax people just a little and then compensate people who actually do need the help. That's a far more effective policy than a heavy handed, let's try and manipulate the market, create a semi government monopoly with taxpayer funding, and then all these weird complications that just make a mess of everything. Let's just have market forces work and then help people once the game is run.
Mhm. It's interesting too because a few years ago, I remember there was such a big outcry about the idea of moving to super boxes as opposed to door delivery, or even the idea of moving away from daily delivery. But in a system like Germany's or other places where we do see privatization, is that something that can be like value added? If people really value
Yes.
everyday mail delivery, or to their door, right, door to door mail delivery, is that something that can be there as an add-on? That's something people can pay for if it's something they think they truly need.
So in Germany, there's more than a few hundred companies. I forget the exact number, but it's I think close to 500. Like I'm citing it on the top of my head, but it's more than 500 companies. Anyways, hundreds of companies. And you know how they compete? They don't just compete on price. They compete also on the range of services. Some companies actually, like I'm a customer that would fit one of the services. I don't need my mail 5 days a week coming in like regularly. I'm okay with actually going to a mailbox once a month and just having
Right.
that there.
Yeah.
I don't honestly, I'm okay with that. Some people do not. So you know what companies are good at figuring out? How to reach every different type of customer and offering them a price for a customized service that they really like. And in Germany, that's what we've seen. If you were to allow market forces to work in mail in Canada and don't put like hurdles in their way, you would find not only that prices would fall, but you'd see different types of services emerge that sometimes don't exist right now, or that people value and don't get, or that people now have and don't really value. So, for example, I never valued the idea. So in Quebec, it used to be very long that it was at door delivery. So I'm originally from Quebec. This is why I'm using this as an example. Originally from Quebec, I was getting mail at my door, and I never really cared for that. If you
Yeah.
said just go to a mailbox, say at like a inside a pharmacy, and you get your mail once, you pick it up when you want, once a month. Sure, I'd like that better. If it saves me money, I would probably do this.
Sure.
Some people, however, do want the mail delivered daily. Let people pick. Let people pick, and markets will find ways to create options for those who want to pick X over Y.
So the losses of Canada Post, I mean, we can't ignore that. And I've heard the idea floated, let's just end the legislative monopoly and let the chips fall where they may. But maybe that might exacerbate the problem we have, the financial losses at Canada Post. So does it have to go hand in hand with
Yeah, you have to do both of them.
restructuring or eventually, privatization?
Yeah, this is where maybe 10 years ago I would have said you can do half of it, which is what the Europeans did. The Europeans like forced the market to open, but then also said you don't have to privatize your postal operators. So some
Right.
countries went that route, which is the case for Germany, but also the Netherlands, Austria, Britain went down that route. No longer a member of the European Union, but was when the directive was passed. Uh, but now in Canada, if you were to do this, you would just increase the liability for taxpayers. So now there's no way of doing half-hearted reforms. The best now you have to do both. You have to privatize and liberalize. The question is how to do both of these things best. And the argument we're making is you can't crash course through this because there risk privatization can go wrong. They have happened. People who are Eastern Europeans can tell you stories of privatization gone wrong. And this is known, for example, as asset stripping. Insiders know how the business work. They hoodwink politicians by buying stuff well below the stocks in the company, well below market value, and then they strip the company of the assets, and then you're left with a hollow shell that's worth nothing, even though it was worth something. So you don't want to have that problem of asset stripping. The problem is when you do that really fast, you increase the chances of asset stripping. But if you do it really slow, you increase the chances of interest group organizing and forming relationship with regulators and legislators that then structure the market in ways that privilege them. So you want to go fast, but you don't want to go too fast. So how do you kind of hit the sweet spot? The sweet spot is what we're talking about. The sweet spot is give in the first year 40% of shares to the employee of Canada Post. That will incentivize them to look over as shareholders so that you don't get the asset stripping problem. And you incentivize them to do cost control and to do productivity enhancement. You partially open up in the first year. In the second year, you sell the remaining shares. You give right of first regard to employees of Canada Post. If they want to buy first, then somebody else can go after. And at the same time, sell the rest of the company, open the rest of the market up, but you have to do them inside that 2 year windows, which is our privatization proposal.
Very interesting. Well, it certainly seems like the status quo is not sustainable. We'll see how the government eventually decides to deal with all of this. Much more is mentioned in this report. It's up at iedm.org. Vincent Geloso, thank you so much for the insight. Appreciate you joining us here.
It's a pleasure.